Okay, so the next speaker is David Black. David is also a practitioner from the UK, based in the north of England in a large mixed practice, and he's going to talk to us about the feasibility of using recycled manure solids for dairy bedding.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a great pleasure to be here and talking to you today at what I think is probably the best Congress I've been to, and I've been to a lot of these over the years. After that, and while your heads are still spinning, I'm just going to coast you nice and simply into the break now, because I haven't got anything nearly as complex as what Simon's just explained. This is a part of a much bigger study done in the UK to look at the use of recycled manure bedding. And just to keep everybody on the same page, we're talking about slurry that's being compressed to high pressure, usually with a screw press device, which gets it to about 36-38% dry matter, and then is being used basically then back straight onto the cow beds fresh, so it's not being composted, and it's a technique that's been used quite a lot in the UK, but technically it's still illegal. It's a category 2 byproduct, and technically it's illegal to use category 2 byproducts for animal bedding. But the UK, the government have given a derogation for a couple of years to try and find out a bit more information, so we're actually using it in an evidence-based way. This is as part of, as I say, a much bigger study funded by the Welsh Government and managed through AHDB, which is our levy body. These are some preliminary results, and this part of the study that I'm talking about was carried out at Newtonrigg College. This is a brand new greenfield dairy that we were involved with building 2 or 3 years ago, and we got a load of farmers from Cumbria together, and we got them all in a room to design the perfect farm. And the only thing that they agreed on was that sand would be the bedding of choice. That was the only thing. There was about 12 farmers in the room, about 20 different opinions, but the one thing they all agreed on was that sand would be the gold standard, as Jonathan touched on before. And then towards the end of the build of the project, it was decided to actually go for recycled manure bedding. So this, as we understand it, was the first farm built in the UK specifically designed to manage recycled manure solids. And part of the bigger trial that Andrew Bradley has talked about is that this the shed that you can see there was split for the bigger trial into 4 quadrants, where we looked at deep RMS bedding. When we call it RMS, recycled manure solids. So there was deep RMS, there was shallow RMS on mattresses, there was sand on mattresses, and there was sawdust. Sawdust on mattresses and sand, deep sand. So that was the bigger trial. This part was very much to answer the farmer question about how do you establish a green bedding cubicle, because it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So this was very much a farmer question. If I'm going to use RMS, how do I get these beds established in the first place? I can't just fill it up like you can with sand and expect it to run. So we split this study into 4 treatment groups. We're talking about rapid fill, which was basically just filling the cubicle up immediately, just on one big heap of RMS. And we had some with cows in straight into that, some that cows were left for a week out to let it settle. And then we did another group whereby it was slow fill, so we just put in maybe 5 or 6 centimetres a day over a period again of a week. So we're establishing the build over a week, and again with some with cows in, some with cows out. It was students that were running this trial at Newtonrigg, agricultural students. Were doing all the measurements for us and doing all the work with us, and we were looking at dry matter, temperatures were measured, and we followed the trial through for a month. And then on the other side of the cubicles, we repeated it about 6 weeks later. So we did 2 replicates, and we did some bacteriology. So here we are, the students are clearing out the cubicles. These are the cubicles that, in our minds, were built for green bedding, for RMS, and with the picture on the right-hand side, you can see there is just a typical dispenser dispensing the green bedding from picked up straight out of the screw press and put onto the beds. And that was the technique that was done. And this was the very basic design. So you can see here we've got 2 sets of cubicles. The first replicate we did up this side, the second one back down the other side. So we've got basically roped off 2 sets of cubicles in the middle. We had what we're calling buffer cubicles, because there was obviously a disturbance between the types of cubicles. These ones, the cows were allowed in. Cows were not allowed in this one, and we did the deep fill and then the shallow fill on this side. So a very simple design. And then the students took the measurements with a standard protocol for taking the measurements, whereby there was depth, temperature, and dry matter. measured these throughout the months project, and then we basically did it all over again with another bunch of students. So there's no great fantastic trends through this. I think a lot of this study just says that there's a lot we still don't know. But we're looking at bed depths here first week, and you can see, as you would expect, if we just look at the bars, we've got rapid fill. So you can see the dark blue rapid fill with cows in, rapid fill without cows, and then the shallow fill. So you can see there's a sort of a trend through the week, obviously with the shallow fill as we build up the bed depth. But it is quite quickly compressed down with the cows. And then that was replicate 1, and replicate 2 didn't even get the same sort of pattern. And we're trying to do this exactly the same people that were putting the bedding in. It was the same farm workers that were putting the bedding in, the same techniques, but we weren't even getting a consistent depth of bed being built up. And then if we looked at the end of the 4 weeks, you can see that pretty much again as you'd expect. When the cows are in, the two replicates either side, when you've got the cows in, as you'd expect, it's not rocket science, it's quite bit more compressed. But you can see from the error bars there's quite a difference across the beds. Now, we then thought dry matter we suspected was going to be quite important. You can see that it's all going in at about 36 to 38% on day 1. But actually, there's certainly nothing significant. There's no great trends there in the dry matter across the week of the build. These measurements here are the relative humidity in an adjacent shed. We happen to we've got some environmentally controlled curtains on the shed, so we had a sensor outside to measure for the curtains. So we were able to get the data from that, and we also had a sensor actually outside the shed altogether, again looking at the relative humidity. We do consider that if you look at the second replicate here on day 5, we suddenly had a very sudden increase across all the beds in dry matter, and that correlated, we think, perhaps with a drop in relative humidity. It's not particularly clear from that, but there's clearly something happening that's affecting not just one of the beds, but all the beds. And then again, looking at bed temperatures, the only take home from this really is that there is a tendency for the rapid fill beds to increase to a higher temperature, which is something we were sort of thinking about, and something the farmers had reported to us anecdotally that they found that when they were putting a lot of RMS in, it does heat, and deep down in the beds it tends to heat. But again, we don't have a particularly consistent picture, although the rapid fill does tend to be a little bit warmer. Again, we've got ambient temperature in here, and there definitely seems to be some sort of association with ambient temperature and the temperature of the beds. And then by the time we get to week 4, the data's not complete because we're looking here at bed temperatures versus depth, and obviously a lot of the beds by that time have been compressed and we weren't able to go any deeper than 5 centimetres. But again, there's an indication that the rapid fill is a little bit hotter, a higher temperature than the slow fill, except we've got one anomaly here, which was a slow one with cows on it. And we think, in hindsight, what that was a particularly sunny couple of days, and we think that was actually sun on the surface of the beds that was doing that. There was some very basic bacteriology done, and again, we don't have anything particularly, we don't have anything statistically significant here, but if looking numerically, there is an indication that when we're looking at coliforms, there was nothing on the TBCs, but when we're looking at coliforms, there was an indication that those cubicles without cows in were slightly lower, or were lower colony-forming units. And there was definitely some indication that when the cows were in, there was a higher percentage or the higher number of colony-forming units. So we've got 22 million here on a rapid fill bed with cows in. So, results. As I said to you, it wasn't going to be rocket science, but this is basically what we found, and rather frustratingly, we don't have an absolute answer on this, and there's certainly a lot more work to be done. So we had no consistent effects across the beds, but there does seem to be a very complex set of environmental interactions going on. I think RMS, green bedding, is quite a lot more hygroscopic than we thought it might be, so I think it's very easily absorbed water from the atmosphere. It's obviously clearly affected by relative humidity, or we think it is. So it may well be, when you're talking to your farmers, it may be more about choosing what the time of the year you're going to do it. You may not be doing this in March and April when there's a lot of humidity around, or certainly in Cumbria there's a lot of humidity around. So it may be more to do with environmental interactions than actually what you're doing with the cows or the bedding itself. There is definitely a higher bed temperature with rapid building, but that seems to be more affected by the speed of the building than the presence of the cows. So farmers are saying to us, well, if you put on a small layer every day and the cows go on and they dry it out, their body temperature dries out the bedding, then you can build it up that way. But what we're definitely trying not to do is end up with a composted green bed with sort of a dark, sludgy black base to it, because that tends to be what happens. And then we're definitely seeing a tendency for higher coliform counts with rapid bed building. So there's a lot more to learn about this product. We don't actually know in the UK whether it is going to be allowed or not. The jury's still out. There's still a lot of evidence there, and there's a lot more to this study that we could talk about. But clearly the actual building of the beds itself, we need to learn a little bit more about it, and it's an inexact science. And I would like to think, Chair, we're back on time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for that talk. Does anybody have any questions for David? There's a question at the back there, if we could have a microphone.
David, could I just ask how the experience with mastitis has been since moving into the new system?
We're talking about the whole project here rather than this piece of it. So one of the key findings from the bigger study was that there's a very little correlation between the bacterial counts in the beds and the bacterial counts on the udders or in the milk, which suggests that the sort of standard 5-point plan is actually very good at actually breaking that linkage. So there were certainly some issues early on with some acute mastitis. There was some Klebsiellas. We didn't lose any cows from that, but there were certainly a few cases, but it wasn't linked to a particular type of bedding. And in fact, very, very interestingly, we were using quarry sand. In the first lot of quarry sand, Listeria was found. So we went to a different quarry in Cumbria. This is not sea sand, it's quarry sand, fresh, deep quarry sand, and there was Listeria again in the second lot of sand. So that probably raised more flags for us than actual acute cases of clinical mastitis. But I think the key thing is most of these beds can work. The comfort was very high on the green bedding. The cows do like it, and they appear to be very clean. And the others are easy to prepare because it's nice and easy to get off the others. But there's a lot more work to be done on this, and no great answers on that yet, Phil.
Thank you.
David, would you recommend it if farmers build a new site?
I'd be a bit anxious that it's not going to be actually allowed at this time. One of the reasons potentially is going to be to do with antimicrobial resistance, in that we're cycling this slurry round and round. Now, we don't have that data yet, but there may be some concerns about that. So if somebody was going to build a farm now, I'd be saying let's just sit tight and see what regulations allow, first of all. From a vet point of view, the cows lie really comfortably. The lying times are increased. They're really clean. Although it's recycled manure, they lie really cleanly on it. And certainly all the guys at Newton Rig College would recommend it without hesitation, because they've seen all 4 being used. But at the moment, jury's still out. So one more. One more.
Yep, one more just there.
That works? Okay. Just about young calves and replacement heifers. So far, the dairy producers in UK, are they using RMS on these animals as well? And
no, that was one that, although we got a derogation, one of the clear rules was that the slurry that we could use for the RMS was only to come from the adult herd, so not from the sick pen, not from the new calved cows, no parlour waste, and certainly nothing from the young stock. So we're not using anything on the young stock. Good question, though.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then we'll just thank David again for his talk. Thank you.